We live in a world where corrupt leaders, ruthless billionaires and authoritarian politicians are greeted with standing ovations. They don't just win the game of power, they're celebrated for it. The strangest part? Many of us admire them, even when we know exactly what they've done. But why? If most people claim to value kindness, justice, and empathy, why do we so often follow those who reject those very values? Research suggests this isn't just coincidence. According to Paulhus and Williams from the University of British Columbia, about 78% of high-ranking leaders exhibit traits from the so-called dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and mild psychopathy. These individuals manipulate, dominate, and control, and the most unsettling part, they do it with charisma and confidence. That leads us to a troubling thought. Maybe the world doesn't reward virtue. Maybe it rewards manipulation. And if that's true, then maybe we need to rethink everything we believe about merit, leadership, and fairness. Perhaps the issue isn't who wins, but how the game is rigged. Throughout history, the most ruthless have not only seized power, they made it look justified. Worse yet, they convinced others they were right. Power, it seems, doesn't have to be fair. It just has to feel legitimate. Still, one question hangs in the air. If we know the world works this way, why do we keep rewarding the worst? Arthur Schopenhauer didn't begin life as a pessimist. Quite the opposite. He was the son of a successful writer and a wealthy merchant, born into privilege and opportunity. From a young age, he was surrounded by culture, books, and travel across Europe. His family expected him to follow in his father's footsteps, but Arthur was driven by something else, a deep desire to understand the world. He believed reason would guide him to truth. But the real world doesn't follow philosophical ideals. Slowly, Schopenhauer realized intelligence and justice weren't what the world truly rewarded. He saw firsthand how the clever, not the wise, rose to power, how the kind were overlooked while the ruthless were promoted. These experiences shaped him. Life taught him what philosophy would later put into words. By the time he published his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, he had already let go of illusions. For him, humans weren't guided by reason, but by a blind, instinctive force he called the will to live. This will is relentless. It doesn't care about morality or fairness. It only wants to survive, dominate, consume. And the more we feed it, the more it consumes us. Schopenhauer concluded, the world isn't unjust. It was never meant to be just in the first place. For Schopenhauer, the problem wasn't just out in the world, it was inside us. He believed our choices weren't truly free. That same blind force, the will to live, pushes us from within without our awareness. You might think you make your own decisions, but do you really? In 1983, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet made a disturbing discovery. He showed that the brain makes decisions before we're consciously aware of them. In other words, your body has already chosen before you even feel like you've made a choice. That changes everything. If decisions come from unconscious processes, free will might just be a comforting illusion. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." That idea hits hard. We can act, sure, but what drives us is beyond our control. Modern science agrees. Studies in psychology and neuroscience show our behavior is shaped by trauma, social patterns, hormones, and context. What we call decisions are often just the tip of a much deeper structure. So if we aren't as free as we think, what does that say about morality, about guilt, about justice? If our choices aren't truly free, then what does right or wrong even mean? Nietzsche pushed this question further. He didn't just challenge morality, he questioned where it came from in the first place. To him, what we call values are not universal truths. They're historical inventions created by the weak to restrain the strong, a survival tactic dressed up as virtue. He called it slave morality, a value system that flipped the natural order, where strength became sin and obedience became virtue. Humility, sacrifice, submission, praised not because they're noble, but because they protect the powerless. Nietzsche believed this morality was born out of resentment. The weak, unable to rise through force, condemned the powerful using guilt. They couldn't win, so they changed the rules. Over centuries, this morality spread, especially through Christianity, which glorified suffering and rejected power as corrupt. But Nietzsche saw this as poison in disguise. He believed we had lost our vital instincts. Instead of striving, creating, and overcoming, we obeyed, concealed our strength, and called it righteousness. And those who stopped playing the game slowly stopped living at all. Nietzsche didn't hate morality out of malice. He hated it because it hid an uncomfortable truth. The good rarely win, and maybe they never really did. The good hesitate, they doubt, they question. But the ruthless, they act. A 2020 study by University College London found that unethical leaders make faster decisions and project more confidence, traits that others instinctively trust, even when morality is absent. In other words, people follow confidence, not virtue. The thoughtful get left behind. That's why individuals with authoritarian traits often rise quickly in business, politics, even religion. And history repeats this pattern. Napoleon didn't conquer France through brute force alone. He used charisma, fear, and spectacle. Julius Caesar didn't destroy the Republic alone. The people begged him to save it. Schopenhauer's will to live doesn't care about fairness. It puts on a mask of morality to seem acceptable. It manipulates, seduces, and pretends to be just. And the worst part, even the good start to believe it. Social psychology shows we associate success with competence. The higher someone rises, the more we assume they deserve it, even if they cheated to get there. And there's your answer to the question we asked at the beginning: the wicked win, because they understand the game. They play without guilt, without hesitation. While the good hold back, the ruthless move forward. The world isn't broken. It's rigged to reward those who know how to exploit it. If the wicked win, it's because the good allow it. But what if the truth goes even deeper? What if people don't just accept power, but secretly want to be ruled? In the 16th century, Etienne de la Boétie wrote The Politics of Obedience. He claimed that most people aren't enslaved by force, but by habit, comfort, and fear of thinking for themselves. Society builds itself around comforting illusions, and one of the most dangerous is the belief that authority always knows best. We follow leaders not because they're righteous, but because they make us feel safe. We choose order over uncertainty, and we pay for that with our freedom. Nietzsche saw this as the greatest tragedy of modern life, trading liberty for comfort, surrendering power to anyone who seems confident even if they lead us to ruin. The will to live, so cunning, convinces even the oppressed that they need their oppressors. And so, we keep building and supporting systems that exploit us, while believing they're protecting us. Facing this harsh reality, Schopenhauer didn't call for rebellion. He offered something even more radical: detachment. Let go of illusions. Stop expecting justice from a world that never promised it. Influenced by Buddhism, he believed desire was the root of suffering. The more we want, the more the will enslaves us. True freedom for him wasn't about winning. It was about clarity, seeing the world exactly as it is. No masks, no false hope. And then, choosing to stop playing the game. Nietzsche didn't want us to retreat from truth. He wanted us to transform it. Power wasn't the enemy. It was a tool, not to dominate others, but to create something new. The overman was someone who rejected inherited values and invented his own. He didn't live in guilt or submission. He lived with purpose. While Schopenhauer chose detachment, Nietzsche chose elevation. He believed true freedom wasn't in denying power, but in mastering it. To stop obeying and start becoming. The world will keep rewarding the ruthless, but understanding that is your first shield against manipulation. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche didn't want you to surrender. They wanted you to wake up. Once you see the game, you're no longer just a piece on the board. Freedom doesn't mean defeating everyone. It means not being controlled. And that begins when you stop expecting justice and start seeing reality for what it is. Because the one who can't be manipulated is the only one who's truly free.